Hello and welcome to this CIPS Australia and New Zealand podcast mini-series brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on our third and final episode of this CIPS Futures podcast mini-series. I'm Charlotte Payne, General Manager of CIPS, covering Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, and I've really enjoyed bringing you this series on professionalising procurement. A quick reminder, if you haven't already listened to our first two episodes, we heard from the co-heads of the new procurement and contract management professional stream the federal government launched here in Australia in the first episode. In the second, practitioners from the Department of Health, Disability and Aged Care gave their views on why it's so important for procurement to be recognised as a profession and the role that qualifications play in building capability. Today, we have not one, not two, but three guests, and we thought we'd keep this episode a bit more relaxed with some quick-fire questions for each of them. Sarah Collins, Emma Morrow and Gareth Williams all give their views on what makes procurement such an exciting career choice in the public sector and why procurement holds the keys to driving and delivering meaningful value for our organisations, their supply chains and the wider communities they serve. Plus, they candidly share some lessons they've learned from the mistakes they've made along the way. So let's get to it. First up, welcome to Sarah Collins.
Hello, very warm welcome, Sarah Collins. So you're currently leading all things procurement at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC, but I know you have heaps of experience in different organisations and in different sectors, and looking forward to unpacking some of that today. But first, Sarah, please do share a little about yourself.
Thank you, Charlotte. So as Charlotte said, Sarah Collins, Head of Procurement at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I do need to actually say that, because when I say the ABC, people think I work for a consultant called ABC. For those who aren't familiar with who the ABC is, if you're listening from another region, we're the equivalent of the BBC. We're the public broadcaster in Australia. So I've been there about 6.5 years, but as Charlotte alluded to, I've been working in procurement sort of since the late 90s. And I'm a chartered fellow as well. And I've also got quite a long history of working with CIPS. So I was on the New South Wales CIPS committee from 2008 to 2021. I think I was on it for 13 years and I was the chair of that at one stage. But I've had a lot of other associations with CIPS, and I currently am one of their tutors for CIPS qualifications through Academy Global as well. It's part of my sort of giving back as being a fellow.
Great, thank you. So let's get right to it. I'm keen to understand what, in your opinion, makes procurement such an exciting and varied career.
I think it's something that's a bit unique in terms of combining skill sets where people like details but are also very good with relationships and enjoy the company of people and talking to them. You tend to find sometimes the people who are very analytical and good at details aren't very good on the relationship side, and the people who are really good on the relationships, like salespeople, are dreadful when it comes to the detail. So I think procurement's a very unique profession that combines those two skill sets, if that's sort of what your personality, etc. is. But sort of further to that, it's an opportunity to really understand your business at a level that a lot of people wouldn't get a chance to. I know myself, I was still fairly young and I had quite a helicopter view of our strategy, both locally and in the regional level. And I got to experience things that people at my stage of the career didn't necessarily do. And we get to sort of act as business advisors back to our organisations too, almost internal consultants. And that's all really interesting. I don't know any other careers that get to do that sort of thing and really add value beyond just the process.
Yeah, it's fascinating how procurement people end up being at, I suppose, the very fulcrum of their organisations and have such good breadth of visibility across the whole organisation, both internally but also externally. Makes it a pretty exciting place to be. Can you share a particularly exciting procurement project that you've been involved with, in particular procurement's role in driving the outcomes?
Look, I've worked in a range of sectors and industries throughout my career, both public and private, and a range of things like FMCG, financial services, government, higher education. I mean, I do have a couple that stand out, but maybe just before I go straight into that, it's just to give people an idea of just the range of things we can get involved in. A lot of people just sort of think most procurement is professional services or IT, things like that. But just a few that I've either been involved in myself or my teams have been involved in. You know, we've tendered for funeral directors for when people donate their bodies to science. I've been involved in a tender to sell a Picasso that had been donated to us. Was involved in the Parramatta Light Rail and bringing all of the diversity and inclusion pieces into it around creating opportunities for long-term unemployed youths, women in non-traditional roles. In my current role at the ABC, you know, I've worked on market engagements for people to make puppets for some of our kids' programs. I've worked on tenders for software to let up-and-coming music artists upload their music to our radio stations where, you know, they're potentially about to discover the next big thing. So these things are actually really interesting, and they really add back to the core purpose of your organisation beyond just, hey, you know, we're engaging a consultant to come and tell us how to tell the time. But one that really stands out was I used to work at JP Morgan, so global investment bank in financial services, and I'd run a tender in Sydney for their disaster recovery site. So nothing too unusual about that, but it's very interesting learning about what you need for DR sites, hot, warm, things like this. Also what you need to do with regards to reviewing data centres and all that sort of stuff. It was a really interesting thing for me because Sarbanes-Oxley had not long been implemented in the US, and we're a US bank, and you know, that real thorough check of any data that is being held outside the organisation when you're invoking DR, which might not sound that exciting, but on the back of doing a good job for that, I got asked to run the same project for our Tokyo office. So I was flying in and out there just for a couple of months, getting that project sort of over the line and negotiated with the suppliers. And that was very interesting because I got to experience pretty much a lift and shift of the same project, but in a very different cultural environment. And that was quite interesting to then sort of understand these sort of things from a different country's perspective, and also sort of understand their internal processes and different things they looked for compared to us here. And that one became quite front of mind when there was the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami, because JP Morgan declared DR and they moved to their DR site, etc., because Tokyo got put on notice. And that really hit home because until that point, it had just been a project, but then it was like lives were at stake. And I got to really sort of understand the benefits of what I'd done and what I'd helped negotiate. So it might not be the most glamorous, but it's one that really stood out.
Sounds like a really interesting project, not only in terms of the deliverables, but I guess the people dimension aspect, looking through the lenses from different cultures and norms, and the fact that it actually came to fruition. Everyone hopes the disaster recovery centre's not needed to be stood up,
Exactly.
for it to be stood up and to have delivered on that in real time. It must have been really rewarding to see that play through.
I mean, it was unfortunate circumstances how it happened, but I felt really I didn't work for JP Morgan by that stage, but I felt really confident that they had a good arrangement in place.
Okay, so look, we all make mistakes, and procurement is certainly not immune to this. Are you able to think back to a time when this perhaps was the case, and in particular, what you learned from that experience?
Oh, I've got a very good example. So the University of Sydney was my first semi-government role, and it was like I'd gone to another planet. It was just, the level of governance and probity and bureaucracy that I just never experienced before in the private sector sort of hit me like a 10-ton truck. Anyway, one of the fairly early projects I worked on, I won't go into specific details, but there'd been an underperforming incumbent supplier. They'd been put on notice. The business was managing them. Our contract was coming up, and the decision was made to re-tender it. The incumbent supplier lost the business. When we announced that they had lost it, they'd asked for a debrief, and I let the business manage the supplier debrief. I didn't sit in on it. And in that, somehow the business person alluded to the supplier that they had been the cheapest, but they didn't win the tender. Now, procurement people know we award on value for money. Even if a supplier is the cheapest, doesn't mean they win the business. And the supplier sort of took that as, well, we were the cheapest, we've been told we're the cheapest, there's clearly something corrupt here, I'm going to complain. So here in New South Wales, in state government and also councils, universities, we have something called the Independent Commission Against Corruption. So the supplier went and complained to them that they believed the process had been corrupt because they had not won it and they were the cheapest price. And ICAC did a preliminary investigation on it, and it scared the socks off me. It really did. And it had me really question, because I'd only recently come into government. Had I done something wrong? Had I not understood what probity meant? In the end, ICAC sort of just came back and said it's a disgruntled supplier. You know, they've been being performance managed. A sound process has been run. There's been an award based on value for money. Recommendation in the future is always make sure procurement are present in supplier debriefs. And that's been a real learning for me. And I cite this one to business stakeholders all the time when they complain to me about the governance or the probity or why do procurement have to be involved in this meeting or have that conversation, etc. And that was really eye-opening to sort of understand why we keep the business honest and how quickly it can go off the rails because of someone just saying something that didn't have the full context behind it. There was nothing wrong with the process, but it resulted in something like that could have ended up being a lot more serious. So I think that's been quite a learning for me. And really it's sort of understanding we don't want to be bogged down in process, but there's a reason why we do have to follow it when we're spending public money in government.
Yeah, absolutely. And the involvement of ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption for New South Wales, is just such a stark reminder of the highest levels of scrutiny that can be applied whenever an organisation's money is being spent, whether that's through, I suppose, public money or not.
No,
so,
and it doesn't take much for them to don't do a preliminary investigation. They do hundreds, and most of them are procurement related. Does not take much. It's just a supplier complaint or a member of the public complaining, and it can derail the process you're trying to follow.
Great example. Thank you for sharing. And a mentor of mine, she shared a phrase which really stuck with me. Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And I think it's so fitting for so many scenarios. Okay, keen to understand what influence do you think public sector procurement and supply professionals hold in order to drive change and progress in organisations and throughout supply chains?
Look, public sector, and this is what appeals to me about it, is the outcomes we get from procurement activities we undertake, whether it's engaging the market, managing categories, bringing social and sustainable procurement into decisions, has a direct impact on the outcome, which benefits communities, benefits the taxpayers. It's a range of people. You, by comparison, you're not just influencing profit like you would be in the private sector. And not to dismiss the private sector, I know a lot of great organisations do have focus on the social and sustainable outcomes as well. But I think that idea that you've got pride in how you are helping the government spend its money, I know a lot of us get tarnished with being paper-pushing bureaucrats, but I don't know very many public servants who do this just for a job to pay the bills. They're in there because they want to serve the public. They want to do good. They want to influence the outcomes. And I think procurement is in a really good position there, particularly if we're procurement professionals who are dipping in and out of public and private and moving around different sort of organisations in different industries, even if you are within the public sector, because you get to understand what good looks like. And you bring in fresh thoughts maybe into government organisations where it's become quite stale because people have been there for a very long time because they're in a very specific job or they don't want to leave. And we're bringing those new ways of thinking in. And I think that's very important because the public sector spends a lot of money and has a huge amount of influence. And if we can lead some of this change, I really think that will shift the market in a positive way, like things like modern slavery. If we're leading things around eradicating modern slavery in our supply chains, or if we're leading things around more environmental considerations, renewables, or we're leading things around engaging with small businesses or minority-owned businesses, we've got such a huge buying power, we really can make a difference. And I think that's something to be really proud of, and don't ever apologise because you work in the public sector.
Great. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the benefit of your wisdom and your experiences.
Right, it's been a pleasure, and I've always enjoyed working with CIPS and trying to champion the cause of professionalising procurement and attracting new people to the profession, because it's very rewarding. And compared to some roles, you'll get a lot more satisfaction of working in procurement than staying in the same role at your organisation waiting for a senior person to retire.
Always great to hear from Sarah, a CIPS fellow. Fascinating lessons Sarah has shared of the need for procurement to always be in the room. Moving swiftly on, let's hear from New Zealand-based Emma Morrow.
So welcome to another of today's guests. I'm joined by Emma Morrow, who leads a commissioning for outcomes at the New Zealand Department of Corrections, and that's New Zealand's largest and most complex government agency. Emma, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, kia ora, Charlotte. Yeah, I've been working in the public sector for 10 years now, always in the procurement world. I started out as a contract manager in a different government department, and so I was looking after a portfolio of contracts for women's and children's health, which was really neat. I was there for 5 years before moving over to my current role, where I'm managing a team of 6, and we're doing a lot of social procurement, focusing on social procurement and focusing on outcomes.
So, what, in your opinion, makes procurement such an exciting and varied career path?
So for me, the main excitement and the main, value drive for me is that the work, especially in social procurement, is really purpose-driven work. We're really shifting, working away, from widgets and from goods, and we're looking at outcomes and how we can deliver on positive social, cultural, economic benefits, which is really exciting nowadays. The same. And, there's a lot of complexities that we have to work through, which is always really interesting and allows for a lot of collaboration. In New Zealand, it means supporting Māori and Pasifika businesses, creating employment pathways for different community groups. We get to look at sustainability, and we're really just focused on investing in people and in communities. One of the other things I think, again, in the New Zealand context, is that we have our Treaty of Waitangi, or the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is our treaty for the country, and really supports the way that we work. And so we get to do a lot of partnering with iwi and Māori enterprises. We get to do a lot of work ensuring kaupapa Māori values are embedded into our procurement processes. And we really get to focus on equity and self-determination from those groups and pull that through into the outcomes. So that's something that I really enjoy, and I don't think you'd find in many other fields.
Really interesting, and what you've highlighted there is that linkage through from your day-to-day activities within procurement and supply, but then really thinking big in terms of the so what and the impact on the different stakeholder groups that are going to be benefiting from ultimately your actions and activities. Really interesting, and highlights that highly relationship focused part of the role and the importance of being able to step back and see the bigger picture with respect to those outcomes. Are you able to share a particularly interesting, inspiring or exciting procurement project that you've been involved with, and what procurement's role was in driving those outcomes?
Yeah, sure. I think it's timely with us up for a Best Collaborative Teamwork Project in the upcoming CIPS Awards. I think that's a great example for us to use as a interesting, exciting project to be part of. So this is a rehabilitation program that we went out to market for. We had gone out to market in 2016. We just did a classic open competitive procurement at that stage. And then, I think because of that, there's been a lot of contributing issues along the way with the contracts and how they've worked. This rehab program is focused on working with Māori, and it's about motivating participants to change their behaviour through understanding their cultural identity. So really understanding their history and their whakapapa and where they come from and who they are. We get really good outcomes from the program, so we're really excited to, be able to go back out to market for it. So when this came up for the time that we were going to go out, we're looking at it. We had 66 different groups to engage with across the country to do this in the way that we wanted to. We formed project teams that covered finance, procurement, legal, contract managers. We had our local relationship managers on the ground. So we pulled those teams together. And that's, I think, also one of the hard things about it, and where the collaborative work comes into play so much, because we needed to have a national solution, but we needed to be able to have that creativity and that respect with our partners and understanding of the different local flavour that needed to come out, and specifically for this type of program. And so we really had to work together to be able to balance locality with national consistency. So that definitely was a super interesting project to be a part of, and it's still going on. It's been over a year in the making as we work our way through the different contracts and we do our various contract negotiations along the way. Some of our iwi partners are like super commercially savvy. Some of them, they haven't settled yet, not so much. Others, they might have different strategies and, strategic priorities that don't align with ours particularly. And so it just takes, we have to work through all of that.
Such an interesting project, and really highlights the fascination, I suppose, in terms of procurement, and that career and the skill set. It's collaborative, but it's being adaptable, it's having curiosity. So really interesting project. We all make mistakes, and procurement's certainly not immune to this. And just thinking about whether you could recall perhaps a time when this might have been the case, and most importantly, what you learned from that experience.
I think one of the major mistakes that we see is that we assume all stakeholders will have like similar views or similar, concerns or something like that. But actually, especially when you're doing national work, and we have in the social sector space, we have iwi and mana whenua groups who we're engaging with. There's such a diverse view on how procurements or services or outcomes can be done or what's needed. And so I think it's really important. And, sometimes when we miss, if we don't have enough time, if we don't plan far enough ahead and we don't capture all those voices, and it just causes trouble down the line, whether that's having to start from scratch, or if that's, getting a contract that's not giving you its optimal because you didn't do that stakeholder engagement. I think, linking back to the example I just talked to, and again, it was really hard to balance that in that piece of work, when we had that national need, national consistency, but needing to have those real in-depth relationships on the ground, and ensure that we were able to get those individual voices and their priorities and their concerns and their beliefs and values and what needs to come through in that piece of work, because they know their community. And so it's really important that we get that through. Second mistake that I think is that I see a lot of people forgetting history and what happened, and that we did something 10 years ago and it still matters, and we need to go and reflect on that and look at the lessons learnt and always capture that along the way and make sure things are safe, because staff turnover, especially in government, it's high. Staff turnover is really high, but we have providers who are out there for 20, 30 years, but we have contract managers or procurement staff who are 3 to 5 years. And so we might think we're doing something original or trying something new, and, the providers have seen it all before. And so it's just really important to go back and find out the history and where things have come from. In New Zealand, we would say that's like, look at the whakapapa of the situation and of the context.
I think you've highlighted such an important point in terms of context is everything. And whether that's over a long period of time, whether it's different stakeholders' viewpoints, perspectives, and so on. And ultimately what really came through in terms of the learning was taking time to plan and building time into the plan to allow for all of those different complexities, the diversity that comes about. Really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. What influence do you think public sector procurement and supply professionals hold to drive change and progress in organisations and across supply chains?
So I think the main power that the public sector has here in New Zealand especially is that we've got volume and we've got scale. Like, we're pretty big. New Zealand government procurement spends 52 billion per annum. I don't know the exact stats on that for social services, but I imagine, it could be up to a quarter of that. So we're talking quite large sums of money. From a New Zealand perspective, I'm sure the Australian or the UK is they're spending a lot more, but for us, that's big. So we definitely have that collective volume. We're able to challenge the way the business thinks, move them away from tactical thinking to outcome thinking. We can encourage them to think about the why. Why are we buying this? Why do we need this outcome? What's going on here? Let's have a real good look and think through some strategic thinking as to what we're purchasing, rather than just a how, which I think is often what people think procurement professionals do, is just that sourcing part, just that little sliver of the procurement cycle, and that's that sourcing. So we're able to think a lot more broadly. And we're able to utilize and get under the stories. We've got a lot of user stories, and we can, use those from people on the ground, from the community, from the people ultimately who will be receiving the service. And we're able to really bring those in to our procurement planning and to our commissioning planning. And, we're able to get more and more powerful stories and feel that impact over time as we go, which is, I think that's a massive influence that we have, is that people factor.
Yeah, the influence, I guess, in terms of demonstrating the power of procurement and supply through the voices of the end users, the beneficiaries of all the things that you're doing. Emma, thank you so much for taking time out of your really busy schedule to join us on today's podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been great. Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks for having me.
So great to hear Emma's experience of the amazing work she does and feeling so purpose-driven and delivering value in a variety of ways. Such an excellent point. And finally, let's hear from Sydney-based Gareth Williams.
So welcome to our final guest today. Gareth Williams joins us from Transport for New South Wales, and Gareth is also CIPS New South Wales branch chair. Gareth, over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Charlotte. Lovely to be here today. Yeah, so Gareth Williams. I grew up here in southwestern Sydney. I've been in procurement now for about 15 years across many New South Wales government agencies, New South Wales Police Force, Department of Education, Department of Communities and Justice, Sydney Trains, and now Transport for New South Wales. I've been a member of CIPS for about 10 years now, a New South Wales committee member for 6 years and a chair for 1.5 years. So I'm forever thankful that procurement found me and hugely passionate about the profession.
Fab. Thank you so much, Gareth. Let's get straight to it. What, in your opinion, makes procurement such an exciting and varied career path?
Oh, I just love procurement. It's so broad and wide-reaching. You get to touch and engage every part of the organisation. Procurement has so many subsets to it. It has, sourcing, category management, contract management, supplier relationship management, supply chain, policy and governance, technology roles, lots of different management types of, roles in there. And then there's varied types of capabilities, blends of, finance, commercial, project and change management, legal, communications. And there's just the different categories of supply that you can touch. You can change categories and you've got a brand new dynamic, different suppliers, different internal stakeholders and opportunities to be harnessed. I've been really fortunate. I've worked across many different types of roles and different categories and learnt things I wouldn't have otherwise known about. I found myself in the energy management team now, completely different. And, the best thing about procurement, fundamentally, we get paid to spend somebody else's money. So that's always a good thing.
It's pretty good. Hashtag for the profession. Yeah, get paid to spend someone else's money. I like it. Are you able to talk a little bit more about a particularly interesting or inspiring procurement project that you've been involved in, and in particular what procurement's role was in driving the outcomes?
Yeah, so we were fortunate to be shortlisted for the CIPS Australia New Zealand 2023 supply chain integration category. So while we didn't come home with the goods, we're incredibly proud of the achievement that we drove over a 4-year period. Sydney Trains has an ongoing need for new rail and turnouts to maintain the integrity of the network. So turnouts are a critical track asset that allow trains to move between tracks. You've probably all seen them out there and about. Sydney Trains divested part of its rail and turnouts business unit in 2015, entered into a long-term supply agreement with the buyer. So my involvement, I took over the contract in mid-2018, so about 3 years after entering that agreement, and observed the commercial relationship was not quite sustainable in its current form. the communication and engagement at the operational level was quite chaotic, with business units competing for supply rather than working together to gain supply. Inventory was not being used strategically to improve availability, and the quote and acceptance process was slow, and the price model was difficult to follow. So I thought, well, what can we do here from a procurement supply chain, excellence point of view to improve it? So it was really a long-term project to drive the following transformation. So we're able to transition the long welded rail into inventory management. It was previously sort of off the books. We couldn't manage it. It was poor oversight. So we're able to bring that into inventory and increase the availability to rail maintainers. We catalogue all the turnouts and turnout components. So that's over 3,000 different types of variables of material. So that took quite a bit of time. We developed a Microsoft Power Apps platform to assist customers in the end-to-end process of material identification. We're in track. We identified a defect. We need to identify the exact materials we require through to defining delivery requirements, and then for the supplier to execute. And then we negotiated simple, transparent, and more cost-effective pricing methodologies, so we could speed up that end-to-end, procurement to pay process, so we can actually get the purchase order in the supplier's hands and get them manufacturing. And we're also able to review all our stock holdings to improve the availability to maintainers. So improve our inventory liquidity, which was quite poor. We gained freight and handling efficiencies, and as well as drastically reduce our inventory. And I contributed to the asset master data improvement project so that a lot of this information about the identity of all these components was catalogued as well inside the asset management system. And I managed the internal consultation, market sounding, sourcing, and subsequent negotiation with the incumbent supplier to achieve tangible cost benefits and 33% lead time improvements. And that's all over a 4-year project. It wasn't sort of set and forget. It had many iterations and waves of activity. So I'm hugely proud of that activity we undertook, and it shows the amount of impact we can bring to an organisation to really improve availability to our maintainers, ensure the integrity of network and daily on-time running. That's what's fundamentally important to the end customer.
I love the way that you had that customer requirement at the heart of that, and taking what to me sounded like incredibly complex and probably competing demands, and really breaking that down into something that turns out to be more straightforward for the end user, although I suspect the devil is in the detail that sits behind the scenes. Now, I've asked this of everybody. We all make mistakes, and we certainly know that procurement is not immune to this. Are you able to think back to a time when this might have been the case, and importantly, what you've learnt from that experience?
I reflect a lot on my mindset when I was working in the central procurement team, probably earlier in my career, where mine or my colleagues' priorities were not aligned to the business units. Our priority was running a perfectly executed sourcing process, perfectly sanitized process. But my best experience for me was working in a division called Commercial and Supply Chain in Sydney Trains. It was a delivery branch where we are amongst the frontline maintainers and renewals folks, and it really gave me a better sense of getting that balance right between delivery, all of our probity requirements and process. It matured me and my decision making greatly. I was at the coalface of the operations. My role had an even more direct correlation with the mission of the organisation than I might have been in previous roles. I reflect on procurement sourcing events where maybe I consumed time and effort on a 2-stage sourcing activity, whereas we maybe should have just gone direct to a 1-stage process. I think of times when I've made supply chain logistics decisions about getting the right materials to the right place at the right time, etc. There's times when I probably didn't get that quite right. I'm currently a project manager for a pilot program introducing batteries into rail facilities. I can think of examples where we could have saved time in our schedule if we knew what we knew now, because it is novel. It's a new asset class to transport, and there's ways we could have done different chickens and eggs and different scheduling a little bit different, but we're all learning from that. But, what I take from it is they're all learning opportunities. And if we all learn from, we all make mistakes, but it's what we learn from our mistakes which matures us the most.
Absolutely. And I think what really shines through there is that adaptability and also asking the questions, being curious to really understand the different dimensions, contexts, perspectives, and so on, makes it a really exciting place to be in. No 2 days are the same. I'm interested in what influence you think public sector procurement and supply professionals hold to really drive change and progress in organisations and throughout their supply chains.
I think it really goes to the ethos of our role as custodians of public money for public good and meet public expectations. 21st century public expectations have evolved since they may have been maybe 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. So, in public sector, our external spend is quite significant, and that comes with that great opportunity to drive broader societal benefits. We had a change of government here in New South Wales 2 years ago, and we're seeing a great emphasis on making our public dollar go further through new policy settings. Includes focus on small and medium enterprises, local businesses, Indigenous businesses, regional businesses, but also workforce participation of areas that are of great focus, and First Nations people and people with disability. So with the emergence of COVID now 5 years behind us, we're focusing on building more sovereign capabilities, particularly in areas of local manufacturing. We're also focusing on more sustainable sourcing practices such as lower carbon materials, renewable energy, etc. But also upstream supply visibility in areas such as modern slavery is a big focus. Saving a few dollars is great, but if we can drive broader benefits, it's much more fulfilling. And there are private sector companies that are doing great things in these areas as well. But we are fortunate in public sector. We have a broader mandate and influence that we can be a leader for other sectors to ride our coattails, so to speak.
I love that, because it's really about public procurement, putting people at the heart of everything. And I love the 21st century public expectations, quite clearly very, very different to what they were even 5 years ago, and only set to change. So it really does solidify procurement and supplies role as being a bit of a fortune teller, I suppose, looking to the future and trying to anticipate a lot of that, particularly with these large, complex, long procurement programs. Hey, Gareth, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate hearing from you.
No problems at all. It's been great to share a few moments and talk about procurement, one of my great passions.
Well, that was pretty awesome, wasn't it? 3 dedicated and passionate procurement and contract management professionals giving their voice to why a career in procurement is exciting, why it matters, and why, when it's done well, it can deliver such value. In fact, that was one of the takeaway messages from the latest CIPS Global State of Procurement and Supply report. Procurement should be seen as the voice of value in an organisation. And while we've heard exclusively from public sector practitioners here in Australia and New Zealand in this series, that message is one that should be repeated across sectors and on a global stage. And that is why those doing the role, CIPS members, should be recognised as professionals. For procurement and supply to truly deliver, being seen as a profession is critical. In episode 1, Richard and Julia shared their vision of developing a network of highly capable procurement and contract management professionals. We've heard from 5 of those professionals over the 2nd and 3rd episodes, and we at CIPS are here to help more people be part of that global network for every stage of your career. A professional network that can learn from each other, share best practice, and become tomorrow's leaders. So do share this series with your teams, with new entrants and those that may be considering procurement as a career. And get in touch with us directly, or start threads on the CIPS community platform to give your own answers to the 4 questions we asked our guests today. We'll finish up on that note of positivity. Thank you for joining us for this series on professionalising procurement. It's been a pleasure to host, and I look forward to being back in the hot seat again soon. This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply.